Well, welcome everybody to another segment of Lewis at Large. Here's truly Warner Lewis from the flight deck, and as always, some smart talk radio is in your future, and we got a good one this time. I'm excited about this. We're going to be talking to Sue Ann Baker. She's many things, not the least of which was she was one of the first female Secret Service agents, and a very, very, very interesting story indeed. Brand new work called Behind the Shades, a female Secret Service agent's true story. We are excited to have her here. Sue Ann Baker, how are you, my friend?
I am fine, Warner. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your program.
Well, we're very pleased to have you here. Let's do a little bit better setup here for our Lewis at Large listeners. Tell us a little bit about the early years for you, and let's just start maybe, I don't know, late high school, college, wherever you want to, and what led you into service with the FBI, or the Secret Service, rather?
Well, I grew up at a time when there were a limited number of opportunities for women, and that would be in the 60s and 70s. And while my family was loving and my dad told me I could grow up to be anything I wanted to be, every time I came up with something, he shot it down. I mean, I'm not sure why, but maybe I kept wanting to be something outside of his expectations. So, like, I remember that the first thing I came up with is I wanted to be a boxer. And he sat me down and explained how little girls would grow up and they would get hurt if they boxed. And I wasn't disappointed for very long, because the next time I came up with something, I said I wanted to be a fireman or a minister or a police officer or a football player. Dad sat me down a lot back then. But he explained how those just weren't proper career choices for little girls. And my heroes at that time were Wonder Woman or Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. So from early on, I had a passion for adventure and striving to do justice and so forth. So I didn't play with dolls. I grew up in the country on Lake Erie in Ohio, and I was much more interested in climbing trees or riding my bike for miles down some country road just to see where it went. And then when I became older, my mother told me a story about how my 8-year-old sister had died in a tragic swing accident. 4 months later, she was pregnant with me, so I came from a loving family who I knew I was wanted. I just didn't know how I was going to make my life count. And then I went through high school, went to college at Ohio University, and then after graduation, moved to Washington, D.C. to seek my fame and fortune. And here's the rub. I still didn't have any life plan. I just wanted to get a job and start making money. But every time I applied for a job, they gave me a typing test. So even if the position didn't require it, because that's what was expected of women in those days. And I finally met a woman after bouncing around at a couple different jobs. I met a woman who became my roommate, and she worked for the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C., and recommended that I apply there. And I thought, well, at least I don't have to take a typing test. And Washington at that time had the highest crime rate per capita of any city in the nation, and I figured, well, if I'm going to learn something, I might as well learn it there. So I became a cop in D.C., and they assigned me to the youth division dealing with teenagers and drug addicts, and my roommate was on the sex squad, so I had been hoping for something juicier than youth division. And then one day I ran into a former rookie school classmate of mine who worked at the White House, and he recommended that I apply for a job over there. And I said, they don't have women there. And he said, no, they're thinking about opening up some positions. So I applied, and the rest is history. And so I went first to the White House Police, which at that time was called the Executive Protective Service. But they never got us uniforms, so we could never do the same job as the men. We couldn't stand in the little guard shacks around the White House.
Right.
So the Secret Service would pull us out of the White House occasionally to help them protect wives of foreign dignitaries that came into the country. So I guess that was how they vetted us to see if we could possibly be full-fledged agents.
Right. I have a question for you. The Secret Service, is it not a branch of the United States Treasury? Is that correct?
It was at that time,
okay.
Until they put it under Homeland Security after 2001.
Right.
but it was under the Treasury Department because the Secret Service, which was founded in 1865, was originally founded to combat counterfeit money. I mean, all the currency that was in circulation at that time, almost maybe a half of it, was counterfeit because they didn't have a central bank printing it. Each region had their own little banks printing money, and it was right after the Civil War. So that's how the Secret Service, or why they came into existence, and they didn't protect a president for like another 40 years.
At this particular point in time, is the Secret Service exclusively, is their mission to protect the president and other dignitaries and other heads of government, or does it have services beyond that?
It has many services beyond that. They still, besides the protection aspect, they have the investigation part of what they do, and that is to investigate any crime against any obligation that's backed up by the U.S. government. So, for instance, your Social Security check, if back then it didn't, it wasn't direct deposited, and there are still some checks that go out in the mail. People steal them, they forge them. That is a crime that the Secret Service would investigate, along with counterfeit money. And now they also are charged with cybersecurity and computer fraud, which didn't exist in my day.
You had a lot of opportunities here to work with a lot of different people from around the world and also some of the domestic presidential candidates. We'll talk about that in just a second. But first, again, reminder, you're listening to Lewis at Large. Here's truly Warner Lewis here from the Flight Deck. And this segment got a good one going here with Sue Ann Baker, one of the first female members, of the United States Secret Service. An interesting story indeed. Well, Sue, without, again, time permitting here, I'd like to hear a little bit about the training that you went through when you entered the Secret Service and were sworn in. Tell us a little bit about the kind of training maybe that would have been different from a normal sort of career, so to speak, in law enforcement.
Well, the training, first of all, the first year that we were with the White House police and working with the Secret Service, we didn't really have any training. They had recruited us out of the Metropolitan Police Department, so we at least knew firearms, but it was really on-the-job training. Once we were sworn in as agents, 2 or 3 months went by, and then finally we were sent to Treasury School, which I think was about 4 months long. And we were in that school to learn all about a lot of law, search and seizure laws, and personal protection, combat, how to take, a guy down. And then each person went to their respective agency schools. So the people who were in Treasury School that were Secret Service agents, then we had our own Secret Service school, which is where we would learn more specifically about counterfeit money and protection.
What about as you were entering the service and those early weeks, months, et cetera, did you feel like you were blazing a trail of any kind, or was this just, so to speak, another job for you that you were trying to excel in?
That's a great question, Warner, because the Secret Service got all 5 of us back together in 2007. And we're reminiscing and we're trying to remember stuff. And most of us would have said that we were really just wanting a job that was adventuresome and different. Although, on some level, we knew we were the first, and we were very aware that we didn't want to mess up and make anything in the future, make it so that they wouldn't hire more women. And we had no mentoring. There were nobody to train us or, other women that had come ahead of us because we were the first. And we rarely worked together. Occasionally there would be another female agent assigned a different shift. But we were aware that we were the first, and we were just trying to do a really good job and earn the respect of the male agents.
I was going to ask you, did you feel like you were under more of a microscope, and did people snicker behind your back at the water cooler, or were they welcoming, and did they try to make you feel included and they were excited about it?
I think the former. I think there was a lot of snickering going on. There were clearly agents that didn't think that women had any business in the Secret Service, and it was difficult, and there was a lot of discrimination. But the Secret Service guys, to be fair, didn't know what to do with us. We were 5 women among 1,150 men, and there had not been any women in a 106-year history. So they were trying to figure out how to use us to the best advantage. And
what are we going to do with these people?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Well, they did find lots of things for you to do, and there's some fascinating stories here in the work, again, called Behind the Shades. Share with us a little bit about the protection that you gave candidates out on the campaign trail. I know there's more than one, but pick one or two that you think stand out and kind of represent what was going on at the time.
Well, my first assignment on the campaign trail in 1972 was to Shirley Chisholm, and she was the first black woman to run for president, and she was running on the Democratic ticket. So I spent that summer between Washington, D.C. and Brooklyn Heights and helped protect her. After the Democratic convention in Miami that year, then they nominated George McGovern to run for president. And so I was switched from her to Mrs. McGovern and was with her the rest of the summer, working 7 days a week, 12 and 16 hours a day, traveling 2 to 4 cities a day for the most part. It was really brutal. But we got to be good friends, and she was safe on my watch, and he lost by a landslide, but that was a national campaign, and it's very, very difficult and time-consuming and stressful to work a campaign.
Did you think you had was your relationship with Shirley Chisholm and Eleanor McGovern, were they different because they were women as well? Do you think it would have been different if you would have been in the protection of a male candidate?
Oh, I think so, yes, because we got to be friends, especially Eleanor McGovern. I was with her the longest. And, for instance, after the campaign was over with and everybody got some rest, I mean, she would have the other couple female agents that had rotated through protecting her and myself over to her house for lunch, or we'd meet in a restaurant. So she even called me on my 60th birthday and wished me happy birthday. And she said, when I answered the phone, she said, "Hi, this is Eleanor McGovern." And I'm thinking, yeah, right, who is this really? But it was her.
Yeah. And
so there's that kind of a personal relationship that I'm sure none of the other male agents had, but there was the bonding of the female part.
And again, there's a chapter 13 called Eyewitness History, Trisha's Wedding, Nixon's China Trip, and the Wallace Assassination Attempt. These are big, big moments in American history, regardless of your politics. Tell us about those.
Well, with Tricia Nixon, she got married at the White House, and I had the opportunity to pretend that I was her and another male agent, and I got in a limousine, and we drove out of the White House grounds trying to lure the press away so that they wouldn't know where she was really going.
So you were the decoy.
I was a decoy. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. You're going down the streets of Washington, D.C., and I'm waving at people, and I'm sure there's stories going around saying, "Hey, I saw Tricia Nixon on her wedding day," but it was me. So then, what was the other one? There was
George Wallace, the Wallace assassination attempt.
Yes, I was in the Washington field office when the call came over the radio. Everybody scurried to Laurel, Maryland, and I was there with 2 other agents, and we didn't protect, but we interviewed everybody who was a witness, or not everybody, but we had at least 4 or 5 people that we interviewed, just know and find out what they knew. After the interviews were over, they sent me to the hospital where they had taken George Wallace, and he was in surgery, and I was assigned to protect Mrs. Wallace and wait with her. And I knew that I was hired to take a bullet for somebody, but that's when it really sunk in, because here's a very gracious woman.
Yeah.
Considering what had happened to her husband, she still had blood all over her white suit, and I waited with her, I don't know, maybe an hour, and then I was relieved, and I left and drove home. But the male agent who replaced me just waited outside the room. I was in the room with her, and I think that was because I was a woman, guarding another woman.
Based on what you know, Suzanne, looking back on your career and maybe what the small amount of connection you still have with the agency, do you believe overall that the Secret Service and other agencies such as that have a good handle on protecting candidates and protecting the lives of dignitaries such as the President of the United States?
Oh, absolutely. They haven't lost a president since Kennedy. I mean, and there's been several attempts, assassination attempts that have been foiled. I mean, if you go back through history after my time, with Ford, he was attacked, I think it was 2 times in 10 days. Somebody tried to assassinate him, and that was stopped, and certainly Ronald Reagan. Jerry Parr was his agent, and when Ronald Reagan got shot, actually Jerry Parr saved his life because he told the limo, instead of taking him back to the White House, to take him directly to the hospital. So, yeah, I think they're doing a great job.
In the terms of a hierarchy, so to speak, if let's just use, for example, when a president travels, let's say today from Washington to Kansas City, we know there's a lot of pre-planning, and certain agencies do sweeps, I would assume, of where the president's going to be, his various routes and all of that. Who coordinates the relationship and the activities of what the Secret Service does versus potentially the FBI versus local highway patrol versus local police? Who is, in essence, the ground zero for all of that planning?
Well, I would think that it hasn't really changed much since my day, and that would be a Secret Service agent called the advance agent, and there always is one, and that agent, male or female, has an incredible amount of responsibility, as you pointed out, not only to coordinate the different agencies, but just checking everything out to the most minute detail. Are the windows closed on the route? Are there, they do sweeps under the street for bombs and then seal the manholes. And, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But that would be the advance agent.
Kind of like the police. I'm curious as to your mindset and the mindset of a Secret Service agent. I know it depends probably on the day and the assignment, but overall, did you wake up every day thinking today something may happen to me, something could happen?
Nope. I think, I was 25 then, so
yeah.
The mind of somebody in their 20s is the same mindset of men that go off to war. It's like, well, I'm young, nothing can happen to me, and you don't expect it, but when you're protecting somebody, particularly in a crowd situation, then the adrenaline starts flowing because you never know when one of those hands that are reaching out to greet your protectee might have a gun in it. And that's another reason that agents often wear sunglasses outside, is just so that they can see better. And they can also be looking to the side and at somebody that might look suspicious, and that person wouldn't know they were really being watched.
Was it difficult, as you were putting, again, we want to remind everybody, we're talking to Sue Ann Baker. She is she's not a former female, she's a female, but she is a former Secret Service agent, one of the first sworn in the early 70s. Brand new work called Behind the Shades, a fascinating look at several of the stories and several of the coverage assignments that she had. But Sue Ann, as you kind of look back on everything, anything you would have done differently? I know you left the Secret Service and went on into a career in private business. Would you have liked to look back? Would you have stayed?
Would I have stayed longer?
Yeah.
Well, clearly not at the time. As I was researching for the book and reconnecting with people in Washington and so forth, and I was so excited to see how many changes had been happening over the last 44 years, it made me wish I had stayed. If it were today, I would still embrace that as a career, although it's not really a career or a job, it's a lifestyle that any agent embraces. But yeah, I would be more interested in it today just because there's many more opportunities for women, and there's about 300 women in the Secret Service, but they still only make up about 10 or 11% of the agency.
When you see somebody on the campaign trail or you see the president talking somewhere, can you immediately pick out the people from the Secret Service?
Oh, yes, absolutely, because everybody's looking at the person who's speaking, the presidential candidate, and the Secret Service are never looking at that person. They're looking at the people who are looking at them.
Well, what, again, you are, in theory, you're retired in a wonderful part of the Pacific Northwest, but realistically, what is next for Sue Ann Baker?
Well, I want to launch a paid national inspirational speaking career. I'm a communications major from Ohio University, and I hope that people who read my book will be inspired by my story because, I was a young woman from a small town. I had average grades in college. I left home to take my first job, not even knowing what I wanted to do with my life. But I was fearless enough to grab an unexpected opportunity that ultimately made a big difference. So I think, if your listeners either lived during the Nixon era or might need some inspiration to overcome their fears of the unknown, I would hope that they would visit either Amazon.com or my website, SueAnnBaker.com, and buy my book. And the website has lots of old photos of me and the other 4 women on it who broke the glass ceiling. But ultimately, I want to be a speaker and reach out to many, many people.
Good for you. We certainly hope that happens for you. Again, the work is called Behind the Shades, a female Secret Service agent's true story by Sue Ann Baker. Again, she just told you about the website. The book is available basically virtually everywhere. And again, thank you so much for sharing some of these stories, some of your experiences, and part of your day today. And best of luck with the speaking career and with the book.
Thank you so much, Warner. It was wonderful being interviewed by you. You are a great interviewer.
Well, thank you. I will take that as a true compliment, and you can protect me anytime you want. So that'll be exciting.
Hey.
We'll be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.